Welcome back to Voices of the Regenerative Decade. I'm Becca Dakini, your host, and I'd like to welcome our next guest, Jonathan Foley. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us today on Voices of the Regenerative Decade as part of One Earth Live.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Jonathan is executive director at Project Drawdown, a world-renowned environmental scientist, sustainability expert, author, and public speaker. His work is focused on understanding our changing planet and finding new solutions to sustain the climate, ecosystems, and natural resources we all depend on. So it's great to have you join us, as I said. I'd love for you to just take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and your work in the movement when it comes to planetary solutions.
Well, yeah, thank you. So I've been in the scientific arena for a very long time. I was originally trained as an atmospheric physicist, basically looking at climate change. That's where my doctorate is. But I shifted to realizing that the Earth's atmosphere and oceans, the physical parts of the Earth, are inextricably connected to the biological parts of our planet as well. You can't really separate the climate of our planet from the ecosystems of our planet. They're so coupled and linked together. So I spent a lot of my life studying things like rainforest and our global patterns of land use and deforestation, and then shifted for a long time looking at kind of the world's patterns of agriculture and how we feed the world, which is actually one of the most destructive things we do on this planet, alongside burning fossil fuels. And so spent about 25 years in research and universities as a professor and scientist. But I also cared a lot about communicating science to the public. So then I shifted to being the CEO of a science museum, the California Academy of Sciences here in San Francisco, and did that for about 4 years. And then more recently shifted to taking the helm at Project Drawdown, which is kind of a blend of these two things, doing science of what are the best solutions to climate change, but also equally communicating that science to a larger audience, not just scientists or policymakers. And so scientists by training, but I care a lot about a broad range of issues and care really deeply about how we communicate these to everybody, because we need everyone to be part of the solution.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. So I'm curious, what is your take on the regenerative movement within, I guess, the solutions realm? Obviously, we've been told that we have a small window to turn things around with our current situation with climate change and also kind of different planetary issues that we're having. So I'm just wondering, what is your take on the regenerative movement? What is Earth regeneration and why do we need it now, or why don't we need it now? And do you think the regenerative movement is what's needed to turn things around?
Well, as a scientist, I get a little bit uncomfortable about any one label as being the answer to all of our problems. So, but with that said, I think the regenerative kind of paradigm, the idea that we not only need to stop harming the Earth, we need to start healing the Earth and kind of rebuild our natural systems, is an ambitious and very needed one. I've always thought that, the word like sustainability lacked a certain kind of ambition or appeal or kind of call to arms. Imagine someone asks you, hey, how's your marriage? And you said, well, it's sustainable. Like, oh, dude, that sucks. We should get you a counseling, you need help with that. That's really terrible. I'm not sure regenerative would be a good answer either, but so anyway, I love the idea of regeneration, but I hope we don't lose the first step in regenerating the health of our planet is to stop harming our planet. And so this is a long journey. It's kind of the Hippocratic oath of our species of, first, do no harm to the planet. Second, let's restore it to its more natural or maybe healthy state. So it's a journey. And that's why I do like that aspect of the regenerative kind of paradigm and how we think about that a great deal. But it's expansive. It's got a lot of different dimensions to it. And I think we need to be very careful to take a broader view and take a long view, and to always, always, always be driven by science, to let data speak to us. Even especially, not even, but especially when it contradicts our very closely held views. We got into this mess because we didn't really want to believe that burning fossil fuels, wiping out our rainforests, doing really stupid ways of agriculture would harm the planet. It was very inconvenient to believe that, but it was true. And scientists like myself and many others before me have been screaming for decades, like, hey, world, pay attention, stop. The data are clear. This is what we need to do. The same will apply to healing the earth. We need to make sure that we're driven not just by belief, but by science. Our heart is necessary, but so is our head. And science sometimes tells us things we don't want to hear, but we need to hear. And so as long as we're guided by science and we're on the path of reducing the harm we do to the planet and shifting to healing and restoring, regenerating the richness of life on this planet, then we'll be on the right track. But I just urge a little bit of caution of making sure that science is along with the ride and that we see this as a very long journey that we're on, but mostly by doing less harm and then also ramping up doing more good.
Wonderful, thanks, Jonathan. So this decade that we're in has been coined by the UN as I think it is the decade of ecosystem restoration or ecosystem regeneration. And obviously the regenerative movement or regeneration is one of many solutions or approaches we can take to the current planetary situation we find ourselves in. I'm wondering what other solutions do you think would have the most impact over the next decade from this kind of, not just regeneration, but your work with Project Drawdown, obviously, and as a scientist is probably showing you some indicators of what will have the most impact in a positive manner to be able to get us to try and turn things around in the next decade. And obviously there's a good chance it will take longer than 10 years. But I'm just wondering if you've got any reflections or insights into what you think can have the most impact positively with where we are right now.
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that the planet has a number of parallel environmental concerns going on, as well as other human concerns around justice and equity and misogyny and racism. And there's so many problems in the world today. We can't address them all with one approach. But when let's say we restrict the aperture to kind of more the physical and biological environment, naturally climate change is one of these issues. Alongside it, right beside it, is the loss of biodiversity and healthy habitats. Alongside that is the decline of fresh water or water resources, both quantity and quality of water. Also alongside that might be the health of our oceans and so on and so on and so on. There are a number of parallel problems. I think the regenerative movement works really well in many of these. It's actually really beautiful because it helps us address multiple problems at the same time. Like regenerative agriculture, for example, helps soils become healthier, harbor more biodiversity, reduce water pollution, increase water holding capacity, makes them more resilient to droughts and floods, and can sequester carbon, which in the long run can help us a little bit with climate change. But it's not a silver bullet for every solution either. That's a little bit of the trade-off. Regenerative practices, I think, are like almost a no regrets. Like, yeah, of course we should do this, whether it's in in croplands or pastures or natural ecosystems or even architecture and the way we design cities. We should be employing these ideas everywhere because they have so many cascading, layered, multiple kind of benefits to many problems. But for climate change, I worry a little bit that people sometimes miss a fundamental truth about regenerative systems as a solution to climate change. There's a big difference in climate change between turning off a power plant today versus restoring a forest tomorrow or farming differently over the next few decades. There's a big asymmetry here. Turning off the emissions of greenhouse gases, whether they come from power plants or from farms, agriculture is the second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world right now. That has an immediate effect that affects the atmosphere today, immediately, 100%. Boom, you turned it off, you flipped a switch, and it will never turn back on again. That's amazing. And it's permanent, it's guaranteed, it's fast. It can't be reversed unless we decide to build another coal power plant or whatever, or start tearing down rainforests. That is the kind of solution we need desperately for climate change now. Regenerative solutions to climate change, anyway, are slow. They're going to take decades before the atmosphere is noticing them. They don't happen very quickly. Planting 1 trillion trees is a great idea, but the atmosphere won't notice it for 30 to 50 years. Or regenerative pastures, regenerative croplands. They're going to be slow, take a long time before the atmosphere notices them, but they eventually will, and we should do that. The other thing is they're a little bit uncertain. who will be taking care of those farmlands 50 years from now to make sure that they're not plowed up again and that carbon's just liquidated back to the atmosphere? Or those trees that we planted don't burn down someday in the future and suddenly go right back to the atmosphere. So in climate change, we need to be a little bit careful that the kind of regenerative solutions to climate change, like regenerative agriculture, reforestation, are inherently slower, they're delayed, and they're riskier. And we also don't know how permanent they really are or how big they are. One of the concerns scientists have is some of the claims by NGOs and a few companies about how big the sinks of carbon in agricultural lands and forests might be are wildly inflated by a few people. I mean, they just can't possibly be true. So I'm just urging a little caution there. But with that said, in drawdown, our analysis shows we need regenerative solutions, especially in agriculture and forestry, to be part of the fleet of solutions we put forward, if you will, the suite of solutions, I should say. But they're going to be slow. They're going to be taking effect decades in the future, not immediately. And they're just inherently a little bit riskier because we don't know how long they're going to be there and who will take care of them to guarantee that they stay there. That's why I advocate a balanced approach to climate change, and drawdown always has. But first and foremost is stopping fossil fuels today as quickly as possible, stopping deforestation today as quickly as possible, stopping bad agriculture today, including, and some of your viewers won't like to hear this, but reducing cattle. Cattle will burp methane no matter how they're farmed, grass-fed or feedlot-fed. They do release methane, and methane matters a lot. We have to dramatically cut the production of beef on this planet no matter what. Even if it is regenerative, there's just not enough land to do all of it. And we have to really reduce food waste and other things. That is part of the immediate stop it now solutions. Then phasing in the regenerative kind of healing part of the solutions of like, now let's do reforestation. Let's do better agriculture. That's great too. And we find that we need kind of both playing out over the next few decades to really have a chance at regenerating the atmosphere, to reach the point of drawdown where greenhouse gases stop rising and begin to be restored back to our more natural place. So with that said, I love regenerative solutions for biodiversity, for water, for health, for lots of different reasons. And for climate change, yep, we're gonna need them, but they're not a silver bullet, and they're a lot riskier and a lot slower and a lot less certain than just turning off a power plant or getting rid of internal combustion engines, insulating buildings, things that affect the atmosphere immediately today, guaranteed, no question, and we know that they're going to work and they're going to stay working forever. So there's just a little bit of thinking we have to do about the role of regenerative solutions in climate change, but wow, look at all the other benefits we get at the same time. So I love this stuff, but I just urge a little bit of caution about the climate solution aspect of regenerative agriculture or reforestation. It's not quite the silver bullet some people would have us believe, but it's part of the silver buckshot, that's for sure.
Appreciate your perspective, Jonathan. It's important to have many different voices amongst us at this time, so appreciate you bringing in that little lens of discernment.
Well, that's just math. How I feel about it doesn't matter. That's the point of science. We actually do know quite well and have known for decades how much soil carbon we've lost over the last 12,000 years since we invented agriculture and we started deforestation. And yet there are companies I won't name and some NGOs I won't name who are claiming we can put back not only all of that, but maybe 5 to 10 times more. And you'd literally need about 5 planet Earths to actually meet the claims of some very prominent regenerative voices right now. And that bugs me. I think there's some snake oil and some bullshit out there who ignore the laws of physics about conservation of mass, the role of methane. Cattle on grasslands burp more methane over their lifetime than feedlots do. I'm not defending feedlots, but we still have a methane problem. Cows keep burping methane, and soils do have to eventually saturate with carbon. Can only offset so much. We can put a lot in there. Maybe we don't know how much, but they can't be infinitely storing carbon forever, ever, and ever, and ever, and ever. We run out of nitrogen. We run out of basically soil respiration balance and so on. So I think we just have to be very careful here. And in all the excitement in the regenerative movement, again, let's be guided by data, by real science, peer-reviewed science, not just the hand-picked, cherry-picked data, especially by groups that are trying to sell you something. So just be careful is all I'm urging. And I'm probably not making any friends by saying this, but I really urge us to be a little more cautious about making bold claims about fixing climate change only by changing the way we graze cattle, for example. That's nonsense. Can it be helpful? Sure. It's going to be a couple % of the solution we need, but not 100%. The math on that absolutely does not work. But we should do it anyway, because it has so many other benefits. Just be careful, is all I'm saying, making these claims, and get people who aren't trying to sell you this or raise money off of it to be the ones who actually do independent arm's length analysis. And there's a really rich body of scientists out there who've been doing this for 30 to 40 years, and they're not really being talked to about it. And there's a lot of work we can build on. Again, with all that caution, and hey, look, I'm a scientist. I'm supposed to be a downer. You know, that's our job, is to, you know, like, scientists have been kind of ruining everybody's day since, you know, the 1500s. But with that said, I really believe that regenerative approaches are the right approaches, but just, we got to stop this silver bullet thinking. Whether it's people over in the tech community who think, oh, we just need to get nuclear power and that will solve all our problems, or I just need a better app or a better solar panel or a better right way of raising beef. Mm-hmm. No. Silver bullet thinking, ignoring data, believing too much in your own mythology, and not being rigorously testing it. This is how we get into trouble again and again as a society. But again, with that said, I think there's an overwhelming consensus of even hard-nosed scientists like myself that, yeah, regenerative approaches to agriculture and forestry and design, yeah, that's a good thing to do. Let's do it. But we got to do a bunch of other stuff too. That's all.
On that note, what other stuff do you think it would be most impactful? Like if you give a best case scenario for 2030, so jump 10 years now into the future, and let's say that we've had the funding and the science and the ability to actually implement some of these solutions. What do you see as the best case scenario, and what do you think would have got us there in 10 years' time?
Well, the most immediate things we have to do, let's restrict the conversation to climate change just to make it a little more tangible. Mm-hmm. But you can imagine parallel tracks and other things. I want to, you know, the first goal would be to stop the harm we're causing. Like, let's put it this way. If your bathtub is overflowing and flooding your apartment because something, you know, you forgot to turn off the water or whatever, what do? You turn off the faucet, then you pick up the mop, right? So all the carbon sinks in the world on farms and croplands, pastures, forests, can't do anything if we continue to spew pollution into the atmosphere year upon year upon year unchecked. So the first job is turn off the bloody faucet pouring pollution into the sky. So the job of this decade, I believe, is first and foremost deploy everything we can that's already cost effective, that is kind of the solutions to climate change, like energy efficiency. We have so much room left to go in making our energy systems, whether it's electricity, heating our buildings, cooling, transportation, doubling, quadrupling, tenfold increases in efficiency are just waiting for us. That should have happened already, but it didn't. Renewable energy is now cheaper than coal and gas and nuclear in many parts of the world. That should happen too. And now market forces can just deploy that because they just finally won in the economic playing field. But in the kind of more ecological side of things, it would be stopping deforestation. It's nice that people want to plant 1 trillion trees, but I'm like, I want to save 1 trillion trees that are already here. I think we could do both, but I'd rather, you know, like focus our efforts on stopping deforestation, which is right now about 10% of climate change is caused by deforestation. And half of that is in only 2 countries, Brazil and Indonesia. And about almost all of that is for 4 commodities: beef, soybeans, palm oil, and timber. We can actually stop that if we really put our minds to it. This is not a big, you know, it's a big problem, but it's not an insurmountable one. So I would really try to, like, you know, let's stop the world from being on fire first before we start kind of regeneration. But now I think we can do things at multiple times. In agriculture, for example, it's great to think about regenerative grazing, but even with all that, right now, the US beef supply is about 1% to 3% grass-fed. It's 97 to 99%, depending whose data you look at, feedlot. We're going to just have to cut down the amount of beef we eat, period, because even if it were all grass-fed, we couldn't meet the current US supply at all, maybe a quarter of it. So we're going to have to cut dramatically beef consumption no matter what. And hopefully regenerative farming will meet that demand, but we first got to lower the demand. We've got to stop food waste. A third of the food in the world is wasted, especially beef and dairy products, because they cost so much to make in terms of environmental damage and natural resources. That's crucial. So I think we have a lot of things that need to happen in parallel, but first I'm like, can we stop the harms as quickly as possible while slowly planting the seeds of regeneration that will naturally, those will take 50 years to have even any noticeable impact on the planet's atmosphere at the scale we need. But stopping the harm of deforestation, bad agriculture, too much beef, too much fossil fuels, that we can do today, and the atmosphere will notice that immediately. We can see it. So I think we need to do them in stages. And we're talking about the first decade matters a lot, but then there's the second decade and the third decade. To get anywhere near climate kind of safety, if you will, or getting to stopping climate change at 1.5 or 2 degrees will take at least 30 years. There's no question. But if we don't start in the first decade, we've lost our chance to do it at all. So the quickest, most immediate responses are stopping coal, stopping deforestation, stopping too much beef, stopping over-fertilization, stopping food waste, stopping really bad destructive practices. Basically, the first rule of climate change is stop doing the stupid stuff, things that don't help us and are doing a lot of harm. So then we can start doing the smarter stuff. But first stop the dumb, then do the smart.
And on that note too, Jonathan, like what can viewers do in their own lives to be a part of, to be part of the solutions? Like, do you have any advice for people for how in their everyday lives they can make changes or take action, or, how can they contribute in a positive way to what needs to be done?
Yeah, well, of course, there's always this debate about like personal actions are by definition kind of a drop in the bucket. I mean, after all, there are 7 billion to 8 billion of us on this planet. Cutting our individual actions materially isn't really making a huge impact to the atmosphere, but they do as a signal to others, because we're voting with our wallets every single day. We're voting with the social signals we send out to others. And, one person like yourself or others could influence tens of thousands of other people to do something better. Then we start to get something rolling. And let's be frank, politicians don't lead, they follow. They want to get ahead of where society is going and then take credit for being in front of them. But they were following us the whole time. So I really think that individual actions matter far more than just the material impact of lowering your personal CO2 emissions, is the influence that has around us. So I would say, and Drawdown and many, many others have done the math on this, things like cutting back on food waste, regardless of what you eat, wasting a third of it is pretty dumb. Let's do things like that, especially wasting beef and dairy products, because those are by far the biggest emitters of any food we eat. Wasting a pound of lettuce is one thing. Wasting a pound of beef, oh my God, is orders of magnitude more impactful to the environment. So that's where I would start, food waste. Eating less meat and dairy products generally, but you don't have to be vegan. Maybe when you do eat meat, and I still do a little bit, I try to support people who are experimenting with these regenerative practices, to kind of help them get some money so that they can kind of get better at this stuff and learn by doing. There's a lot of great experimentation, and we need to bring that kind of economy to scale. So I'm going to vote with my pocketbook every day. If I buy beef, I'm going to try to buy it from those folks, not from those folks. So I think that's helpful. Clearly energy efficiency in our homes, like with lighting, heating, air conditioning, anytime something breaks, like a refrigerator, a furnace, a light bulb, replace it with the best in class, most efficient possible technology, especially vehicles. The fact that anybody sells a vehicle that gets less than 50 miles per gallon on this planet today, I think is criminal. Nobody, unless you're a contractor or, really needs a big SUV to get around San Francisco, for example. Why the hell are they still around? That's crazy. You think you need a pickup truck for that one time a year you go to Home Depot to pick up supplies? You can rent the pickup truck. In the meantime, drive a Prius or something. And if you can afford it, get an electric one, because that's helping to subsidize that industry too. And we need money to move over there. So I think there's a lot we can do. And of course, our engagement in civic affairs, voting matters a lot. But I live in California. My vote doesn't matter at all because of the way the Electoral College is set up. No matter whether I vote or not, Nancy Pelosi is still my congresswoman, Kamala Harris is still my senator, and California has nothing to do with the presidential election. That kind of sucks. So your daily actions with your pocketbook matter a lot. But between those two things, like the big government and us personally, there's a whole suite of other things we can do locally, like local elections. A lot of climate change solutions happen at the local level, and you kind of unsung heroes. There's a gentleman named Hal Harvey here in the Bay Area who likes to say there are about 100 people in America who have the most power to change our future on climate change, and you've never heard of any of them because they're the head of your zoning board. You know, can you build a 5-story building in San Francisco or a 2-story building? That'll have a huge amount to do with transportation and urban sprawl. Who's the chair of your Public Utility Commission? And, you know, decides, do we build coal or we build wind to power our electrical grid in the future? These people, nobody knows who they are, but they're the people on the ground to make a lot of big decisions that affect us all. Who decides where the bus routes are going to go, where BART gets expanded in the future, or subways, whatever. Those are hugely important. So getting engaged, it might feel hopeless looking at Washington sometimes. So look at your own hometown. Look at your neighborhood, look at your school boards, look at your zoning boards, look at, you know, these are political levers you can actually make a difference to, where sometimes it feels a little hopeless at the federal and international level. So there's so much we can do as individuals. The list is endless, and don't abdicate your power to others just because you're being told you can't do anything, or that all you can do is change a light bulb. No, you can change minds, you can change hearts, you can change whole economies, you can change whole political systems. It's literally the power of individuals that changes everything at the end of the day.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate your perspective. We've come to the end of our time together, and I'm just wondering if you would love to, would you be able to share with our viewers how they can find out more about your work, particularly Project Drawdown, and how they can get involved with what's happening with Project Drawdown and any other work that you're involved with?
Yeah, well, thank you. So Project Drawdown is, we're a nonprofit, we're nonpartisan, we're non-commercial. We are a group of basically science nerds and writers, and our mission is to serve you. We want to diligently review all the possible solutions to climate change that are out there, and independently, without a stake in it, try to scientifically measure how big are these solutions and what are they going to cost, and then share that as widely as possible in hopefully an intelligent and maybe sometimes inspiring way. We wrote a book back in 2017 that did really, really well, but instead now we're shifting to completely digital communications. So drawdown.org is the place to go. And we just published an entirely free book called the Drawdown Review 2020. And we're going to do that every year and give it away for free. So I hope folks will go visit drawdown.org and then follow us on social media, at Project Drawdown is our handle on Twitter and Facebook. And we have a pretty lively following on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll spread to Instagram and all the rest sometime soon. But again, you know, that's if people don't use us, we're no longer useful. So I hope people do kind of get engaged with what we're doing and learn from it. And we're also creating a new channel called Drawdown Learn, which is going to offer free online classes about kind of the science and economic fundamentals of climate solutions. And these will be free online classes for everybody, won't charge you a penny. We're going to have a lot of other cool online community resources, including like slides and infographics that people can use in their own teaching, their own presentations. So stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more to offer there pretty soon. And we're also starting up some new programs working with businesses, and we're also creating a new program that's looking at the links between improving climate change, but also improving human health and poverty and human rights, seeing these as interconnected problems. And that will be launching later this year too. So stay tuned. The new, now rebooted Drawdown is going to be bigger and better than ever, and it's going to be growing quite a lot. So yeah, please follow us, and we'd love to hear from you. We don't want to just be broadcasting. We want to be hearing from people too. So especially on social media, or drop us a line. Love to hear from people who have questions or have, you know, thoughts about collaboration, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Thanks for all the hard work that you're doing in this area of planetary solutions. We greatly appreciate your efforts, and thanks for your time here on Voices of the Regenerative Decade and with One Earth Live. You've been listening to Jonathan Foley, and I'm Becca Dakini, your host, and we'll see you again for the next segment.